My name is Pastor Tukiko Jaketch, Head of Stewardship Department and Shared Development from Ranen Conference. I want to bring on board some of the problems that people have pertaining to stewardship, especially tithing. This problem most people have, and therefore we are going to bring this one on board so that people may be enlightened how these things are supposed to be handled. Why do we return tithe? Reason as to why we return tithe, number one, is that it is an acknowledgement that whatever we have, whatever we own, belongs to God. And therefore we bring it as an acknowledgement that God is the owner of everything that we have. And number two, we normally tithe because God provides what we call sustenance. The food, the drink, and whatever we have, we normally believe that we get them from God. We don't get them from anybody else apart from God. And that is the major reason why we normally tithe. So number one, I've already mentioned for the sake of emphasis that we return tithe as an acknowledgement that God owns everything. Number two, God provides what we call, God gives what we call sustenance. And therefore we don't have any reason to deviate from returning tithe. That is number one. Number two, man was born naturally selfish. So God has brought the idea of tithing to minimize, mitigate, or rather reduce the degree of his selfishness. By the aspect of deviating, or rather putting aside something that he claims to be his own, God uses that one as a mechanism to reduce what we call selfishness from man. Otherwise, man would be so much selfish if God at least left him without putting something as a commitment to him that he must actually demonstrate that everything that he has does not actually belong to him. So the number two principle why we must return tithe is that it reduces or rather mitigates what we call selfishness that human beings have. We are born natural selfish. Try to look even how children behave. Even a child whom you believe that has not known anything, try to beg him something. You will see him behaving uniquely simply because he was born with that natural selfishness. So the aspect of tithing was actually introduced so that God would minimize the degree of selfishness that human beings have. Number three, tithing was actually introduced so that we may be in a position to support the gospel ministry. This gospel ministry, it can actually be derived from how the Levitical system actually began, where the sons of Jacob were given a portion of land, but there was only one son who did not have any portion, who did not get any inheritance from the father. So the rest of the sons of Jacob, that were Reuben, Simeon, Judah, Asa, Dan, Issachar, Benjamin, Naphtali, Gad, Joseph, Zebulun, were all given inheritance, except one son by the name Levi. Levi was not given any inheritance. The inheritance was that once Reuben has actually gotten all the inheritance and has had what we call an harvest, he was supposed to return 10% that actually belonged to Levi. And that one was acted as the portion of Levi to support the Levitical system during that time. And this is where the church has actually adopted this system that is running up to now. And therefore we cannot deviate from it. So number four, we have now reached how we are supposed to be returning tithe. The number three that I have already captured, number one, number two, and number three was dealing with why we return tithe. And now beginning from number four, I'm going to explain how we return tithe. How do we return tithe? So these are some of the hard questions that we are going to tackle that most people have actually been encountering. And I hope after this lesson, the problem that most people normally face, we are going to alleviate completely. Number four, can we use tithe to fund other projects of God or support the vulnerable? This one, most of the politicians normally use. Most of the politicians are ready to support most of the vulnerable, or rather the disadvantaged. but they fail to return what actually belongs to God. Tithing belongs to God. It was actually gotten from the tenth. Tenth actually does not belong to us. The tenth belongs to God and God Himself. So we want to actually check from here that if somebody has supported somebody that is vulnerable, maybe a widow or widower and orphans, has he returned something that belongs to God? So if we have to look at the book of Testimonies to the Church, volume 9, page 250, it is very clear that many people, I want to read it verbatim so that it can actually be gotten from this quotation here that I'm going to read, in reference to the response of those who ask that if somebody has supported the vulnerable, has he returned something that belongs to God? So let me read from this. I'm reading a quotation from the Church Manual, page 137, and it's a quotation from Testimony to the Church, volume 9, page 248. A very plain, definite message has been given to me for our people. I'm bidden to tell them that they are making a mistake in applying the tithe to various objects which, though good in themselves, are not the object to which the Lord has said the tithe should be applied. Those who make this use of tithe are departing from the Lord's arrangements, and God will judge them for these things. That is found from the Spirit from Testimony to the Church, volume 9, page 248. If somebody supports the vulnerable, or has he returned a portion that actually belongs to God, that person has not returned or tithe, because the tithe does not belong to you. Like if somebody took money from you, and when he was coming to bring back the money, he met somebody who got an accident. Does he respond to you that he has returned the portion because he has used that one to assist somebody that was that had an accident? To you, you know very well that the debt that person was owing you, he has not actually brought back, because you did not authorize him to use it to support somebody who had an accident on his way when he was bringing back your debt. And this is exactly what happens with God. We are supposed to use a portion that belongs to us to support those who are disadvantaged, rather the vulnerable. But we cannot assume that because we have already returned this one here and supported God's created being, and therefore you assume that you return a portion that belongs to God. That is a total lie. So get it from there. There are many people who have engaged themselves in some activities. Some activities which when they appear, when you see them, they appear as if they have actually done something to God. But that was not the way God has said tithe was supposed to be returned. So we cannot assume that we return tithe when we have actually used a certain portion to support the vulnerable. We are supporting the vulnerable is not wrong, but we are supposed to use our own to support those who are disadvantaged. I go to question number 5 that also disturbs people. Can somebody who has taken a loan tithe? This is simple. We normally give an advice to those who go for loans that it would be easy to manage your loan when you took 10% of the loan that you got and returned 10% to God, so that the little amount that you'd be remaining with as net, you may now be in a position to tithe, and it will be called a honest one, because the 10% of the actual loan that you took, you had the ability to return because it actually did not belong to you. If somebody returns 10% of the loan that he actually took, 10%, then the little amount, because when you take the loan is the advance, the salary that is given in advance. Under normal circumstances, when it is given, what you'll be earning will not be equal to what you are earning prior. And therefore, this has actually prompted people to become unfaithful. So we normally give people an advice that whenever they go for loan, it is good that they return 10% of the loan, so that the little amount that they will be remaining with as net, they may be in a position to return, and it is termed as a honest one, because the initial one that you took, or that bulk one, you are able to return as a tithe. And therefore, the little that you'll be remaining with will be termed as a honest one. Number 6, how can you tithe the living things that are less than 10? There are living things that are less than 10. like the sheep, or the hen, or the goat, and the cows. These things may not be 10, but what we have actually lived with, that if they are 10, then we are supposed to return 1. But if they are not 10, are we still in a position to return it? This is what we are normally taught. If you have living things that are less than 10, you are not supposed to return 1. Or you call somebody so that you may estimate all the amount that they cost and return at that time. Why is this one not so? Because when those things continue to stay with you, their value increases. And therefore, tithing is a relationship between man and God. And therefore, as those things continue to increase in value, the amount that you owe God also becomes high. And therefore, what we normally teach is that if they are less than 10, just wait, because God is not in a hurry. When the actual time reaches when you are supposed to use one of those things that were less than 10, that is when you are entitled to return that one that you intend to use. Not you bring somebody who deals in them and estimate for you them, then you return 10% of what that person has estimated. That will not be a honest one. So if they are 10, regardless of time, you are supposed to return 1. But in case they are less than 10, then brothers, we are not supposed to bring out 1 as tithe. Because they are less than 10, you need to just leave that one that you will be using out of the ones that are less than 10 is the one that should be entitled to tithe. When you take it to the market, you'll be able to know the value. But if you don't take it to tithe, then you may call and evaluate somebody who knows how to value them, so that he may tell you the amount of what that may cost. So start from there. You will be able to return the portion that actually belongs to God. Otherwise, you are not supposed to return living things less than 10 as tithe, or calling valuer to come and evaluate them and estimate the amount that they may cost, and that is what you may be in a position to return. Number 7, how can a shopkeeper return a faithful tithe? We have those by name shopkeepers. How are they supposed to return tithe? We have 3 ways that shopkeepers can actually use to return tithe. Number 1, the most appropriate one is stock taking. This one is involving, because it will require you to go and bring somebody who is a professional, or engage the services of somebody who will be coming every now and again to evaluate the amount of whatever you have. But it is the best one. If you can do it, if you can manage, it's well and good. But if you cannot manage that one, then you can use these other 2 options that I'm also going to bring on board. You can also create salary for yourself. You can create salary for yourself if you are owning a shop. And as the shop continues to grow in value, then you can also sit and increase your salary. So that what you will be using here is the salary that you earn from this shop. But if there is something that you are going to use, for example, when things will get finished and the shopkeeper will be in a position to add more, even if they have not actually gotten finished. And this normally brings the shopkeeper into an awkward situation, because he may not be able to know the amount he has sold and the amount that he has not sold. And that will be now the responsibility of somebody or a professional whose services are actually hired to come and establish whether a profit had been made or not. So it is very difficult with the shopkeepers to return a faithful tithe. That is why we have already mentioned that they need to create salary for themselves. Number 1, they need to stock take. That would require professional. Number 2, they are supposed to create salary for themselves. And number 3, they should tithe anything that go or that will cause loss to the shop. For example, you may not be owning everything in the shop. For example, you may be selling some of the edible commodities. And when you intend to buy a cloth, then you need to go elsewhere to a certain shop so that you may be able to purchase at least a cloth. Any amount that you've already spent outside the shop that will not add value to the shop should actually be tithed. That is the 3rd way. Or you promise to bring for a family or a body. Maybe somebody has died in Mombasa. You want to give them or support so that they may bring that body, and you are going to use the money that you are going to get from the shop. That whole amount that you are going to spend, you must tithe. You want to get fee out of the shop. Then that 10% of the fee that you are going to pay to a child who lands somewhere is supposed to be tithed. So we have 3 ways that we are clearly mentioning that can actually be used by a shopkeeper to return a faithful tithe. Number 1, we have already mentioned about stock taking. Number 2, creating salary for yourself. Number 3, you can tithe any expenditure that is going to be spent outside the business, and that may call for a honest tithe for a shopkeeper who may be completely stranded and does not know how tithe should actually be returned. Number 8, can somebody who commits tithe offense be forgiven? This is a problem that most people face, and people normally make some cheap conclusion, especially when it comes to matters of tithing, especially when they are bereaved or when they are faced with certain calamities. Then most of them say God knows, and that is how they live everything that God has already known. And brothers, the beloved, we are clearly told that other sins that people commit are forgiven, but somebody who commits tithing offense will never be forgiven. Get this one clearly. Other sins that we commit are forgiven, are forgivable. But somebody who commits tithing offense will never be forgiven. This is actually can actually be read from the book of Leviticus chapter 6 verse 1 to 5. So go and read this one clearly so that you may actually get how God will dealing with this one here. So why is it not forgiven? Because the remedy, the answer to this problem was already given in the Bible. And therefore you cannot assume that God you've already prayed over it, and you assume that God has actually forgiven you. Or when somebody commits tithing offense, however much that person prays, however much that person fasts, however much that person confesses, that person shall not be forgiven until he or she shall have returned the entire amount he or she misappropriated plus 1 over time. Brothers and sisters, this is very clear, and we need to get this one here so that we don't just assume that God has forgiven us because we have already prayed or rather fasted over it. Number 9, does the New Testament talk about tithing? Matthew 23 verse 23, 1 Corinthians chapter 9 verse 13 and 14 is very clear about the New Testament. So when we read Matthew 23 verse 23, there the Bible is very clear. Jesus alluded about tithing. And if you happen to come across 1 Corinthians chapter 9, 13 to 14, you will also get what the Bible talks about tithing. I want to read Matthew chapter 23 verse 23 and get what Jesus says about this. Woe to you, teachers of the law and the Pharisees, you hypocrites! You give 1/10 of your spices, mint, dill, and cumin, but you have neglected the more important matter of the law, justice, mercy, and faithfulness. You should have practiced the latter without neglecting the former. So there we conclude by saying that Jesus supported the aspect of tithing. He did not throw it away, but he supported the aspect of tithing. So 1 Corinthians also has something that we also need to get and learn from. 1 Corinthians chapter 9 also has something about, in response to what we are trying to answer, that does the New Testament talk about tithing, or it was only captured in the Old Testament? What does 1 Corinthians chapter 9 say? verse 13 to 14. This is what it says. Verse 13. Don't you know that those who work in the temple get their food from the temple, and those who serve at the altar share in what is offered on the altar? In the same way, the Lord has commanded that those who preach the gospel should receive their living from the gospel. It is very clear, brothers and sisters, it's very clear here that Jesus did not talk ill, did not discard the aspect of tithing. As some people preach that this was the Old Testament thing, we no longer practice this. It is very clear that Jesus, Matthew 23:23, Jesus did not discuss the aspect of tithing, but he alluded about it. In 1 Corinthians 9:13 that I've just read, Paul also gave a clear confirmation, especially to those who are serving the temple, that they need to become the beneficiary from the services that they offer in the temple. And therefore, somebody cannot come up to discourage members from returning tithe, that it was not captured, or rather talked about by Jesus in the New Testament. Number 10. Should we tithe from gross or net? Beloved, this is very clear. A faithful tithe should be returned from gross, not from net. Even though people get this one differently, I've realized when I normally conduct Bible study about this, that we are not very clear of what is known as gross and what is known as net. But the gross is what is said, this is your total earnings. That is what most people perceive as gross. So what is termed as your gross, what you understand as your gross, that is what the spirit of prophecy confirms that tithe will actually be returned from. Number 11, there are those who are those who have cows and those who are milking. Some only know that those who normally sell their milk are those who are supposed to return what belongs to God. Beloved, even if you don't actually sell your milk, there is a portion of your milk that actually belongs to God. So this is what we normally teach, especially those who are not selling their milk. You are supposed to go and start counting. Begin counting from day 1 up to the 9th day. Know that the 10th day, when you are supposed to milk, the whole amount of milk that you are going to get will actually belong to God. But this is what you normally teach. You need to guard against 2 things. Don't change the person who graces. Don't change the person that milks. But if you are supposed to purchase your own milk, it is very clear. You are supposed to, you can take it, but you'll actually take it with the fine. When you are selling 1 liter at a cost of 20 shillings, yours will go with the cost of 24, because that is what the Bible says from Leviticus 27 verse 31. You will return it plus 1/5. So we need to be very careful, so that you don't actually leave it for granted that we are not supposed to be tithing what the milk that we get that we don't actually sell. The one that we sell, we shall be able to know, because the money will be brought back in payment of what that person has consumed. But the one that the number of days will be counted in the calendar, and will establish the 10th day which belongs to God, is the one that is consumable within the home, that is not sold elsewhere. So that is how we shall be actually be living with those who own milk but do not actually sell the milk. Number 12, there are those who have farms. So some of them assume that if you have 10 of them, then you can actually leave 1 for God. Reason as why we discourage this one is that the productivity of these farms might not be the same, because they may be placed at different places where the fertility of the land may vary from place to place. And therefore, what both the Bible and the spirit of prophecy recommend, both the Bible and the spirit recommend, is that you will be counting lanes and spaces, and from there you are able to establish where you are supposed to demarcate. And that place where you've demarcated, the other portion where the demarcation lies will actually belong to God. So, brethren, this is how we are supposed to be returning what is called tithe. So we need to be very careful with most of the lessons that we have actually gotten from people who may be talking ill about this thing. So we have actually just a summary of what we have already studied so that we may actually follow these things keenly. We were actually looking at some of the reasons why we return tithe and how we normally return tithe. So in a summary of what we have actually learned, we were trying to say that we normally return tithe to acknowledge the ownership of God and His sustainability. We believe that even when we walk on the road, the person who is taking care of us is God and other than anybody else. So that was when Jacob wanted to leave for a journey. He asked God some of these things. He made a vow before he left that God, if you will take me, provide for me food and clothes and security. In other words, you will watch over me on the journey until I come back to my father's homestead. I'll acknowledge you as my God. And this stone here, I'll actually lay as a pillar where we shall regard this one as a place of worship. And I promise that I'll give you 10%. That is found from Genesis 28, 20 to 22. We were not able to read it verbatim, but I've already quoted it, where we have actually gotten the background of where we normally teach from. So we acknowledge God with what He has actually given us. We also mentioned that God introduced this one purposely so that He may alleviate selfishness, because man was born naturally selfish. And the mechanism that the Lord has put in place for Him to alleviate that selfishness is the aspect of tithing. We return tithe to support the gospel ministry. The way Jacob actually made it, he was able to isolate one son that he needed to give any inheritance. But the rest of the sons, the brothers, the sons that were given inheritance, a portion of 10% was actually given to Levi with every person. And they knew that one. And that is how God actually began it. And that is where the church has actually adopted this one from. We also mentioned that can we also tithe to fund the projects? If there are certain projects, the building is coming up, can we use tithe to support that? There are those who are vulnerable. We have already read that there are certain people who are engaged in activities, which is good in themselves the way they are looking at them, but they are not the ones God had already said that tithe should be returned from. Tithe does not belong to us. You cannot claim something that does not belong to you to have engaged in doing somebody something. You can use your own resources to fund that, but you cannot use resources that do not actually belong to you. So tithe is to God and God alone. We do not pay it as we pay tithe and offerings, but we normally return it. We have also mentioned that somebody who has taken a loan can also tithe. He tithe the loan so that he can get a relief, so that the little amount that he makes it as net, he may be in a position to tithe. We also underscored that things that are less than 10, because God does not have a hurry, you don't need to worry about them. When the time actually reaches for you to use that one, that is the one you intended to tithe, you will be able to know the value when you take it to the market, or you call for a valuer who may come and tell you the exact amount, the value of that one, so that from there you are able to tithe from that. We also got that shopkeepers can also return tithe. They can set salary for them, they can stock take, they can also value the expenditure they have used outside the shop, the one that will not add value to the shop, and that is what they are supposed to tithe. Then we have also found that the aspects of tithing is not something that was only taught in the Old Testament, but it is also taught in the New Testament. When we read Matthew 23:20, we found that Jesus alluded about tithing. And those who preach against it, that it was something of the old, that does not have a biblical support in the New Testament, are liars. Because we have an evidence from the Bible, as found from the book of Matthew chapter 23, verse 23. And we also read from 1 Corinthians chapter 9, 13 up to 14, where Paul also confirmed that those who are doing the work in the pulpit should also become the beneficiary from what services they offer. And therefore we have two biblical evidence, even if we don't quote the one from the spirit of prophecy, that confirm to us that tithing principle was not something of the Old Testament alone. We also found out that we should also tithe from gross. What you may term as gross, according to understanding, what is normally written as total earnings. That is what we normally gauge where tithe should actually be returned from. We have the spirit of prophecy backup that tells us that tithe should be returned from gross and not from net. Those who only return tithe from net or do not have a support, the spirit of prophecy support, or rather backup about where tithe should be returned from. So we also continue with the other person who has milk and does not sell the milk, whether he's supposed to return tithe or not. We have already given an evidence that somebody who does not sell his milk also has an obligation that he is supposed to surrender to God. Or he should be counting the number of days. Then when it reaches the 10th day, that one actually belongs to God. There are two things that he is supposed to guard against. Number one, a person who milks, he should not change. And even a person who graces, that person should not change. So that when that day reaches, you may know very well that the 10th day, because you've already used your 9 days, that the 10th day belongs to God. You need to make members know that that day you shall have a milk that is supposed to be sold. But when you want to take it yourself, then you are also free to take it, but you'll take it on a higher side, because when that 1 liter is sold at 20 shillings, you'll be able to purchase it at a price of 24 shillings. Because Leviticus 27 verse 31 says that when somebody wants to take his own thing, then he's supposed to add 1/5 of that, the price of that thing. So that is very clear of what the Bible teaches. So a farmer, we have also mentioned that a farmer who may be having 10 pieces of land is not supposed to give one, because the productivity of those gardens may not be, the farms may not be the same. And therefore what we normally teach is that out of every piece of land where you've actually planted from, you need to either count spaces or lanes, and from there you're supposed to demarcate what actually belongs to God. Other than taking the entire farm, that because you have 10 of them, I want to isolate this one, or rather put this one aside to belong to God. That will not be a faithful one. So the honest one is the one that is normally demarcated from every piece of land. And by doing that one, you'll be returning a honest or rather faithful tithe. So may the Lord bless us and give us strength so that we may be able to think and contemplate about these things every now and again, so that we may not be confused when it comes to matters of things that we normally handle. May the Lord bless this message in Jesus' name. Allow me to pray. My Father who lives in heaven, we are grateful for what you've actually done to us. This is a lesson that has brought confusion to most of the members. Thank you for having revealed these lessons to us, so that those who are actually getting this message may be in a position to get a glimpse of what you actually revealed to us, and they may be able to practice the right things that may prompt them to return a honest one. Forgive us, because during the time that we did not know, you do not count those ones. But now, because that we have gotten this light, help us so that we may live by the light that we have gotten. Thank you in advance for having heard our prayers. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.